There we are. Hey, folks, thanks for tuning to the BAMF podcast. I'm your host, Mike Lafferty. And here on our third episode, it's a series now of Writers' Chats. We're talking about how to write an action scene, because that's important. And because I don't know how to do it very well, I've got J.R. Hanley, science fiction writer. Hey, J.R.
Hello, hello, hello.
Yeah, another science fiction writer and frequent co-host, Walt Rebelliard. How you doing, Walt?
Rah.
And martial arts enthusiast, game designer, and writer in his own right, Ryan M. Danks. Sorry, too much coffee,
worries.
not enough enunciation. So, all right,
So
guys.
I actually have a quick question for you, since you're a martial arts enthusiast. So does knowing the 1990s version of the Army Chop count as martial arts?
You know what? That's going to have to go to Walt because he actually learned all of that.
Definitely not. Although I will also say this. In frequent combatives pits, I will tell you that saying you're a black belt doesn't mean shit. So,
especially if you got it because you had good attendance and your mom paid your bills on time.
Yeah, yep.
Well, there's a really sweet lady down the block who gives me great gardening tips. She's a black belt. I shouldn't be scared of her?
Well, it depends. Is she a Shodan in Ikebana, which is a real thing? You can be a black belt in flower arranging and growing plants. It's a black belt or a Shodan, which just means first step in English.
Mm-hmm.
A Shodan, it does not necessarily in Japan mean just martial arts. It can be applied to anything.
Just like Kung Fu is not just fighting.
Yeah, Kung Fu actually literally translates into English from Chinese as human effort, hard work, perseverance, all those translations.
Yeah.
Yep. So
I did not know that.
Yep.
Look what I started.
Mm-hmm. Don't get me and Walt started. We've had podcast episodes for days on that.
Oh yeah. We which you can find in the BAMF podcast in our back catalog.
Our extensive BAMF catalog, our extensive back catalog on the BAMF podcast. Did you know, as of this podcast, we have 451 episodes?
Wow. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Most podcasts don't make it past the first 100.
I need a hobby.
Well, apparently it's podcasting.
Yeah, it seems like it's happening that way. So I always wanted to be in radio, but I didn't want to not be able to buy a house and starve. So this is.
Can you do the voice though? The
voice.
The 1920s radio announcer voice?
Oh, that transatlantic kind of. And this just in, folks.
You know why
polio
they
rates
did
are
that, right?
surging. I'm sorry.
They actually did that because they were compensating for the poor audio technology. There was speculation that the COVID lockdown that had everybody not talking, that actually might become a new American dialect, because what else were we going to do, I guess? There's some serious literary articles on the subject.
Wow. We have gotten off topic.
Kung Fu fighting.
Yeah, hang on.
Actually, the first topic wasn't that far off, was it? Action scenes.
Fair enough. All right, it doesn't have to be fight scenes. I mean, it could be a chase scene. It could be actually, no, it's either fighting or chasing, right?
Extreme gardening.
Extreme gardening. That's some Jackie Chan level stuff, right?
You got to invite your neighbor back into this podcast. We need to talk to her.
Yep.
Kathy's good people. She really is. Well, hey, let's talk about it. JR, help me out. You are a published science fiction author. We had your Amazon page up just a second ago. Oh, hey, Jacob Blackman's watching us. Hey, Jacob, and he can do that voice as well. So
outstanding. But don't get me distracted. I'm like the ADHD kids. Ooh, shiny. So I think it comes down to is you got to find, if you're going to write the action scene, what makes it make sense. And I had the person, Tim Taylor, when I first started writing, that was one of his things, is if you can't envision doing it with an action figure, then it probably isn't possible with the human body. Because I don't know how many of you have read fight scenes where it's like, wait a minute, how did they bend that way? Is that even physically possible? Do they have extra joints they didn't tell us about? So I tend to map it out. I use for the actual organization, I use sand tables, which is an army technique that I learned, where basically you sort of create your own topographical map and move accordingly. And then I bought some little green army men, and I make sure that that's possible, or I'll do it myself. That is somewhat limiting when you have some physical disabilities, but I mean, I make sure what I write is possible physically. And if not, Walt calls me funny names and makes fun of me.
Well, I guess that brings up another point, is that it helps to have a beta reader who knows about fighting?
Yeah, you can learn a lot if you can just, and Walt sends them to me all the time. There are videos out there of experts doing it, and you could just do monkey see, monkey do and describe some of what they're doing. I mean, you don't have to be able to do all of it yourself.
Well, I mean, most writers, you've been to a writer conference? You seen these people?
Very, very true. I was one of those people.
Okay, you understand. So yeah, well, I mean, let's talk pacing, because the worst part for me, and I'm reading any kind of fiction, is if I get to a fight scene and I get bored, and I'm skipping ahead to see what happens next. I mean, the guy has lost the flow of the narrative, and I'm like, okay, so you've switched gears. I'm just going to skip ahead to the next part that I find interesting, because I'm a bad reader like that. How do you avoid that happening in your fight scenes, Walt?
Oof. The biggest thing to remember is focus on things that will draw the reader into what you're trying to show them. I mean, because at the end of the day, that person wants to have those sensations. They want to experience that thing that they don't know anything about, because they might not have ever been punched in the face, or they wouldn't know that. They wouldn't know what it feels like to have your hand so scraped up because you were climbing a sheer rock face that every time you put your hand on the next grip to get up, all you can feel are like these little sharp pains in the back of your knuckles and in between your fingers from the nerves radiating through your hand. I mean, they wouldn't know that because they've never done it. They've never done a sheer climb. I had an author the other day that just joined the publishing group that I kind of belong to. Hey, you. And they wouldn't know what a melon was like when, faced with a cat. But I had an author who is part of the same publishing group, and they said, hey, can you help this lady out? And, I was like, yeah, well, what's the question? And they said, oh, well, we want to get the details right on a halo jump. And I'm like, oh, crap. I mean, because one of the most difficult types of parachuting is halo and hey-ho jumps. And most people know what a halo is. Not a lot of people have ever heard of hey-ho. It's just one is low opening, one is high opening, one has more flight time with more risk in getting shot, and then the other one has less flight time with more risk of you splatting into the floor. The big problem is that we have an entire culture of Hollywood that has affected people and affected their idea of what these military operations look like. So, she sent me the scene, and it's an urban fantasy where, these plucky, magically adept agents are going to be doing a halo jump to insert on a target. So I'm reading it, and the first thing I read is that the main guy that they need to make sure gets on target and does whatever, this main brother gets panic attacks. And I'm like, no. You have some, and and as I'm reading the scene, there was a lot of character exposition. So by the end of 800 words, I was like, all right, these characters are actually pretty cool. I was very, I judged them very quickly because I saw a couple of little traits that kind of made them not candidates for what they were doing. And after talking to her and reading the entire chapter, or part of the chapter, it was like, I actually like these characters. These characters are fun, but they're going to effing die. I mean, that's just... So, I explained to her, like, one of the big things that most people don't know about high altitude jumping. Now, she had said she'd gone skydiving before, but after pressing, it's like she'd been regular civilian skydiving. You're talking 15,000 feet and below. She had never done a high altitude thing. And the biggest thing that most people don't know about high altitude is you can get positional asphyxia or hypoxia. So anytime you go over 18 to 20,000 feet, depending on the hemisphere, you can have serious problems, not only breathing, but just existing. First of all, it's extremely cold. So you're looking at -20 to -45 below zero. Secondly, your lungs don't process air that well at that temperature. So you're going to have problems. But the other thing is the reverse of what you do in scuba diving. You come up too fast in scuba, you get nitrogen bubbles in the blood and you get the bends. You can get severely hurt. Same thing in parachuting. You come down at 120 miles per hour, and those nitrogen bubbles haven't been purged from the blood, then you're going to have issues. You can pass out. You can have ruptured blood vessels. You can start bleeding. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff that happens. And these people were just like, let's get on the plane and jump at 35,000 feet. What?
Let me ask the asshole question. Sorry, we have an explicit tag. I have to use it sometimes. If you write a fun scene and it's an engaging narrative, and the only people you're going to lose are people with experience like you who are going to be like, get the fuck out of here.
Right.
There's a reason I don't ever watch a military or historical movie with my dad.
Yep.
Because it doesn't matter what era. He knows more about the weapons. And he's like, that's not how they shot grape shot in the Revolutionary War.
And that's the thing too. You're going to forgive a lot if the characters are enjoyable, if they're doing something exciting. Like for example, Mission Impossible, the latest one they just did. They did a Halo jump. Both of the people who did the jump would have died in real life if they had done it, right? But it was engaging. It was part of the scene. There was tension. There was whatever. So it's you can forgive a lot. The thing is, you have an author who says, "I want this to be as realistic as possible," and then gives me a scene straight out of the WB network. It's like, look, you kind of have a cool scene with this, and this. Putting these sensations in here and trying to get military grade is going to, you're going to have to change some stuff. So that's just, something, but I mean, going back to the original point, your audience will suspend disbelief if the scene is engaging, the characters are interesting, and the stakes for them are real. So, I mean, that's something to consider.
I got some excellent advice on that, because one of the things that came up when Walt and I were working on, he was giving advice on writing some special forces troops, was, his answer was, this isn't how they would really act. But I obviously, when you're hiding behind armor, having everybody act like a well-oiled machine can be a little boring if you're not setting up the scene right, and if you want to make the characters believable. So I was talking to Jason Ansbach, the publisher for this one, about it, and I said, so where do you want me to balance the line between 100% accurate and good fiction? And the answer he gave, actually, I liked a lot. It was basically acknowledge your sin, beg for forgiveness, and do it anyway. So as long as you can say, yes, I know this might not be how it really is, and you give a justification that's just barely plausible, most of the people that are experts will just go with it. They just want to know that that they know. So, and that's what I'm going to use going forward as my mantra.
Fair enough. All right, I guess part of that's knowing your audience. And Jason obviously knows the people he's writing for, and that's a big segment of military sci-fi readers. That's how they're going to react, and he's been writing for that segment for a long time, so he knows them. Brian.
Okay, Brian, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was trying to get you guys back. You froze.
Oh.
And then
2020 problems.
So the other thing that I think when you talk about writing fight scenes that helps me is sort of like with a movie. Like, obviously they don't always get the details right, but one of the things they do with camera angles you can mimic in your writing, and it makes your writing very cinematic, is you start out wide, you narrow into the individual, and then you pan back out, and you can do that keeping the tension going. Because it's nice that he just punched the guy in the face or stabbed him with this sword or whatever, but if you ignore the guy that's behind him that's about to stab him too because he loses his focus, then that's an issue as well. So you can sort of show all the chaos by zooming in and out on the focus.
And that's the other thing too. I mean, the thing you realize, especially watching something like Hong Kong cinema, at which Ryan and I have talked about this on the podcast before. The big thing to remember is that what your reader is checking out, as well, just as much as on screen, a good percentage of the time, they don't know what they're looking at. Okay. So if you put something too realistic and too focused, they're not going to know what they're looking at. Like, for example, when MMA first came out, right? So the first UFC was won by a guy who did Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he kind of dominated every time he went in the ring, right? So fast forward a couple of these events, and I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina, at the big stadium, and we go to see the super fight between Ken Shamrock and Ken Shamrock and Hoist Gracie, right? So a lot of people around us were like, "This is boring. This is stupid. They're hugging for 30 minutes." But those of us who have done grappling before were looking at all these like very complicated transitions and people maneuvering for whatever. And we were like enthralled because it was like, holy crap, did he just try for this? Did he just try for that? Whereas the layman looks at that and says, they're just hugging for minutes. This sucks. We're leaving. And a whole bunch of people got up and walked out. And that's the same thing in your writing. If you get technical and lose your reader in some of these details and don't keep those moments of like suspense and cost and risk, just like in the kung fu movies, if you show Ryan and I are going to geek out for a second, so spoiler warning. If you show something like Lin Sildaida, which is a combination of an attack and a defense at the same time, right? So if you're using that particular movement in, say, something like Jeet Kune Do, right, which is Bruce Lee's martial art, a lot of times you're going to miss the subtleties of the movement. The average person's going to miss the subtleties of the movement and was like, that guy was like a ghost. He couldn't hit that other guy. And it was crazy. And there was 3 movements and I didn't see anything. And then the guy fell down, but like, if you know what you're looking at, you're going to see it, but the layman doesn't know that. So you got to, like you were just saying, wide out that camera angle so that even though you would not haymaker like that in a real fight, you want to show something that the reader can identify with, because it's kind of how they would throw a punch, even though they break the stupid knuckles on their hands.
Well, you kind of got a balance between accuracy on one side and showmanship on the other, right? You want to entertain the reader while still giving an occasional tidbit to the guy who knows what you're talking about, and, enough so he knows that while at the same time, Uncle Bob in back, who has no idea about, fighting or race car driving or whatever, he's still entertained.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
And when somebody knows so much about something, like I get this when I read military fiction. I can tell when the guy was in the military, and it's actually makes me check out. But the same thing can be if someone knows a lot, they over describe and they overdo it. And you can show your knowledge in a few lines, and the people who know will be like, wow, got that right. And then that's it. It's all you need to show, like, yes, I know what I'm talking about. Here's it, like Avatar: The Last Airbender. The martial arts in that are some of the best drawn at the time and probably since. Their fight scenes were not that long, but they feel that long because they were memorable, because they remembered, and I think this is key to writing a good action scene, is remembering what makes a scene. You've got to ask yourself who wants what from whom, and what happens if they don't get it. And though that sets the stakes for that scene, and after every little exchange or every little description, should always back up and kind of remind the reader, this is why we're here. Maybe the character thinks about it or sees, Superman sees Lois falling or about to be pushed from the top of the building. That's a problem. That's why we're here. If he doesn't get that, she dies. So, it sets the stakes. And every single time he's fighting whoever he's fighting that week, Lois's danger should be present every like 2 or 3 frames. That way we can see, now she's falling, and that escalates the story of the scene. Because if you just watch like Jet Li's Fearless, amazing fight scenes, but they are all about 5 minutes too long.
Yeah,
because they're just like let's just show a whole bunch of martial arts, but very little story, except for the last fight where he was actually poisoned, and sorry, spoilers, but like all those different things that were going on in the story relevant to it, and how long can he last, and all of that became relevant.
So that's the other thing where you mentioned, too many details, where you got to know the audience you're writing for, because I want those details. When I write book reviews, because I host them sometimes on my website, one of the things I say all the time is, man, I wanted more details. Tolkien, not long enough. Give me more.
Oh my gosh.
So and there are a lot
stuff.
Yeah, there are a lot of people that read like that like those details. Obviously not all details are created equal, but just as a general rule, like I don't like reading a book and I can't tell you what the character looks like. I want to know.
So no Twilight for you?
That's the one where it's like never mind, I can't go there. This is a family friendly show.
we do have an explicit tag. It's okay.
That's
Sparkly Vampires. I'll leave it there.
My first short story that got published was published. They said because I did not once describe the main character, and because the action scene was on point. But that's kind of funny because it was like, and they even asked me like, well, were you going to describe this main character? You didn't once say anything about him except that he has a cloak and a bow, and I was like, well, no. I like white, like I said, I think last time, I like the white space. I like leaving the reader to think of it on their own and put themselves in that moment. But I get it because not everybody's like that.
There's two different styles of readers, and you're right. Some want the details, and some want to be able to picture themselves. There's a reason why Halo Master Chief never takes his helmet off, because the player wants that could be me, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's why it's most of the game. I don't know if you can still, but at one point in time, you could only do it first person view. You couldn't pull back because it was you.
Mm-hmm.
So
I just wanted to mention, JR, you had mentioned to me in private chat that we should mention to remember all the senses. And there was this article I found I wanted to mention. That was rule number 4 was you could get visceral sensory details to draw the reader in.
Yeah, and that's one of the things people forget about, like when I see combat scenes. Like I'm not as huge into the martial arts, so I sort of fake it for that. I tend to focus on more of the military aspects of the weapons and whatnot. And they forget when they're describing what the weapon feels like or the sound it makes when it zooms through the air or whatever, that there's the feel of it in your hand, there's the smell in the air. If you've got fires, what's burning, because human flesh doesn't smell like you think it does when it's on fire. And
now,
I mean
that's cool. I'm not going to ask what you know about that.
Yeah, so. JR might have been in some of the Middle East's best testing sessions for how Humvees stand up to explosives.
Spoiler, they don't. But I was there early war when we made our own armor, which was the name for I'm told is now racist and derogatory. So we'll just call it, we up-armored it ourselves with 5-gallon metal from 5-gallon drums. Mm-hmm. Or 50-gallon drums, I should say. So, but yeah, but knowing all that, and you don't have to have smelled those things or been in those places to fake it. You can read first person accounts. You can just find experts that know. You can take educated guesses. You can hint that it smelled bad without actually saying what it smelled like, because most people don't know what you don't know as well. Like I would say probably I'm in a minority that knows what those things smell like. You can include, some of the crap details. Like if you're doing a military unit, for instance, one of the things that was common for early war was we all had to burn our fecal matter, and that has a distinct aroma.
There was a whole segment in Jarhead about that.
Yeah, and so but those kinds of little details, that the sensory thing that immerses them in this world, even if it isn't directly related to the fight scene, when you immerse them in the world, when you get to the fight scene, the stakes are already higher because they're there too.
And if you have the you can do an amazing amount of research. I mean, I've several people on several podcasts, experts in writing, that most people all agree that one of the most researched dudes out there back in the day during the 90s and stuff was Tom Clancy, to the point where he was even investigated because they wanted to know where he was getting his information from, and it turns out it was the frickin' public library.
They asked him about that several times on different interviews back in the day, and they're like, how did you do all this? Because everyone's convinced he had an inside source on the submarine stuff. And he goes, easy, I have a library card.
Yep. And he did some of the most amazing research. But that research combined with maybe talking with somebody who's been actually there or aboard or in those situations. One of the best first impressions of Iraq I'd ever heard came from a Marine Corps combat camera guy, and he'd only been in country a little bit for a little bit, and we were like, so what do you think of the place so far? And he goes, first impressions are always make for an incredible experience. He goes, and I got into a little trouble because when I wrote my first article about landing here, it saying that stepping off the plane into Iraq was like using a hairdryer on high in the middle of a full porta potty.
Accurate.
Right? Very accurate. But even to somebody who's never been to Iraq, most people have been to like concerts or whatever and been in a full porta potty in like August. So they know what that's like.
Ooh,
Most
the sweat
people,
box.
right? No, most people know what a hairdryer feels like. So combine those two things and even if you're doing like a first person thing, I stepped off the plane and it was like being in a porta potty in August with a hairdryer blowing at my face. All of a sudden those sensations, that smell, that kind of like that feeling of grime, you get all that, and you never had to even step off the plane once to kind of be with the character that's in that scene.
One of the things.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, well, I was going to say one of the things that I like from Michael Laron uses this technique. He calls it writing by the seams, and he got it from authors that he was reading and just doing observations. But I really like how he broke it down. And it's basically that your first 500 words into the scene, kind of like what Rob just, Rob, Walt laid out.
I answered to both.
What he laid out was, like the very first 500 words is all about get as many senses into play as possible. And that will immerse the reader in there. And then from there, after that 500 words, the next 500 is describing the tension of the scene. They're already thinking in those senses, like we've already touched on them. So if you do anything to bring up memories of it, little things here and there, you don't have to do as much detail when you're in the moment of the tension because you already brought them in to that. And you can be now forgiven a little bit to skip those sensory details while you're going into good pacing of the action. And then you can back off, maybe go back into the scene before you transition to the next one. I like that as an idea because then as a writer, when I sit down, I can say, okay, let me get them into the scene. I did that. I'm going to go get a cup of coffee and get into action mode and then do that. And then when I reread, maybe I have to smooth that seam out. Maybe I don't. But I like that as just a technique for writing myself.
Point of order, start with the coffee.
Yes. I was going to say, I like that you
Usually
equate
it's the
coffee with
refill.
action. Yes.
Well, I'd like to keep talking some more, but I actually have a meeting on this other laptop I have to jump on in about 60 seconds. So any closing thoughts before we call it a podcast?
Slap it.
Ryan, JR, anything?
Nope, we're good.
No,
Okay.
It's fun.
All right, cool. Always good to have you guys on. Let's do it again next week if you're up for it. I just wanted to share one thing that our viewer, Jacob, mentioned to me. And I don't know if this is a good, bad book, but I thought it was interesting. This guy combines action scenes and sex scenes.
I mean, they do call erotica active romance.
There's, the best things in life are combinations of two things that worked.
Reese's peanut butter.
All right,
I was
save me from myself. End it now.
All right. Hey, folks, thanks for tuning to the BAMF podcast. We'll have another Writers Wednesday next Wednesday. Talk to you later. Bye. And this is the awkward moment